But speaking of affording the basics we need to get by, we can't forget that there are two things in life that are guaranteed: death and taxes. Well, tonight, as many of us are well aware, the month of February marks the end of the financial tax year, typically for businesses, but also for South African Revenue Service. And that does mean that for professional taxpayers, for entrepreneurs, for freelancers, individuals who might be self-employed, you as an individual as well need to just make sure that you have abided by some of the benefits, support, and even the rebates that are offered when it comes to tax. But one thing we're also going to pay attention to is the fact that SARS is not resting on its laurels. It's been very clear that they've identified over 500 billion rand in undisputed debt on its books. And experts say that SARS will aggressively pursue or be pursued by the taxman in 2026. So how do we ensure compliance? Junaid Bhayla, team lead for tax debt at Tax Consulting SA, joins us now on the line to help us unpack more around this theme. Junaid, welcome to Kaya Biz and thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you very much to everyone that's tuning in. It's a pleasure to be here.
Fantastic. Thank you, Junaid. I guess first things first, let's take a look at the theme regarding the undisputed debt book of more than 523 billion rand. Help us contextualize this. Who owes SARS money? Is this the final figure of money? And how did this figure come about?
Well, SARS have released their official figures as at December 2025. In terms of the figures themselves, we've seen a record-breaking 523 billion, which is now due in terms of the undisputed tax debt book. The biggest jump we've seen from this particularly is personal income tax, which has actually increased quite substantially by almost 27.2 billion rand. In order, for my actual understanding or my theory for this, the filing season had closed quite late in October last year. As a result, assessments are raised against what was submitted by taxpayers, and you're typically afforded about a 1-month grace period before it's considered a tax debt. So, of course, in process, you've got the tax obligation or the taxable event, the assessment being raised, and a tax debt when you miss that payment due date. So my theory here is, the assessments are raised that carried November, and when payments weren't made at the end of November, these then became formal tax debts, and that's why it's reflected in the December figures.
This is significant, right? Because it essentially means that it's money that is lost to our revenue service. But from what we understand, SARS has the necessary systems in place to make sure that it's able to find this money and essentially claim it. So help us understand how they typically go about this, and a reminder for us as South Africans to understand that they are operating in a legal framework.
Absolutely, and that's a brilliant question. SARS, of course, on their side, they have taken the time to reconcile individual taxpayer accounts. They've had a look from, essentially going through third-party data, which is legally submitted to SARS so that they can do these reconciliations. And they've looked at what's been declared by taxpayers. Where there's any sort of a discrepancy or, an under-declaration, for example, they then issue these additional assessments. It goes through the whole verification process, of course. And, SARS then wants to recover on these amounts. In terms of the powers that are available to SARS, they have quite a few different collection mechanisms at their disposal. These, of course, include garnishee orders for salaried employees, civil judgments where, you get blacklisted. They then instruct the sheriff to come and attach and execute. You also then have what's called a third-party appointment, where SARS can instruct a financial institution who holds your money, alternatively, anyone who owes you money, to actually pay those directly across to SARS in settlement of that liability. So you've got this record high tax debt figure in terms of undisputed debts. And of course, you've got this revenue authority that now wants to, eat away at this and, of course, ensure that it doesn't repeat itself. So SARS is taking the steps on their side to enforce stricter compliance. They want to make paying a lot more simple and a lot more easier, and, of course, make non-compliance a lot more costly and a lot more difficult to sort of prevent the situation from repeating itself.
And this is important, right? But as you say, I guess it's a multitude of factors here in terms of enhancing accountability, but also being lenient with South Africans who perhaps might not even have been aware that they're flouting the rules. And I guess that's part of where I'm trying to get your feedback, Junaid. Tax avoidance versus tax evasion are two very different things. And I'm quite keen to understand, how much leeway have South Africans been given, or can they still be offered in terms of opportunities to be compliant?
Absolutely. So essentially, where a taxpayer has a tax debt, SARS isn't, as much as they would want to, of course, enforce their collections, they're not without, or taxpayers, sorry, are not without any legal recourse. In terms of the relevant legislation, there's various tax debt relief mechanisms which taxpayers could, of course, use to address their outstanding liabilities with SARS. So, say, for example, a taxpayer receives a final demand of 1 million rand, but they're not actually able to settle that final demand. They then have the option of entering into a deferral of payment, which is essentially a payment plan. Okay. You would settle that full liability, inclusive of interest and penalties, just over a number of monthly installments. On the other hand, where taxpayers are experiencing severe financial hardship, especially when, we've got these increased costs of living and all sorts of other things to take into consideration. A possible tax debt relief mechanism there is called a compromise of tax debt. And with that compromise, SARS will actually agree to write off all of the interest and the penalties, and a taxpayer would then settle with SARS on the capital amount that is then due. So on one hand, you've got the payment plan to assist with cash flow. And of course, on the other hand, where the financial hardship is so severe, you do have this compromise relief to assist taxpayers in becoming compliant once more and maintaining that going forward.
Junaid, you make it sound so easy, so clear, cut and concise. But the truth is, when you're a South African citizen who receives a notice, you're under pressure financially, you might have a garnishee order against your name, you get the WhatsApps or the SMSs from SARS, including the emails. We just want to put our head in the sand, right? Because we're in a bit of a panic. But I guess this new campaign by SARS and opportunities to become compliant, what do we as the average South African taxpayer need to be mindful of, especially if one does find themselves in a precarious financial circumstance?
Well, the first thing I would suggest is anyone who has received a final demand must first ensure that it is legitimate communication from SARS. Mm-hmm. From my own personal experience, I've seen quite a few clients who have received these phishing scam attempts as well. So it is something to be mindful of, especially during this time. But where a legitimate demand is then received, you'll notice that, of course, SARS mentions in that demand these relief mechanisms. But as you've mentioned, taxpayers get that. They see this large amount that's due and they don't know what to do. The head in the sand approach, again, not something I would recommend. Interest and penalties continue to accrue. And of course, SARS will enforce collection steps if you simply disregard it. Once they've sent you a final demand, they have essentially opened the door to proceed with those collection steps because they've given you notice. Yeah. Of course, where you do receive that and you then are trying to resolve it, my recommendation is not to do this alone. There are tax attorneys, there are accountants, registered tax practitioners, people who engage with the legislation and engage with SARS on a regular basis. And so my advice there would genuinely be to seek professional assistance and remedy your tax debt with a guided hand.
100%. Very, very much needed. Junaid, such a pleasure having you with us as always, sir. Appreciate your time.
Thank you so much.
Junaid Bhayla is a team lead for tax debts at Tax Consulting South Africa. As you've heard, it's that time of the year, so do make sure that you do your best to be compliant, but make sure that you're also reading the right feedback and communication from SARS. If all fails, speak to a tax consultant. So often we try to do things alone, and yes, there's technology there to help us. And if you've got a simplified, financial arrangement, which makes it easy for you to file your taxes, go ahead and do so. But where there are some complexities involved, please, please, please speak to a specialist.